Chapters 22 and 23 of A Short History of the United States. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Allison Hester of Athens, Georgia. A Short History of the United States by Edward Channing. Part 8. The Jeffersonian Republicans, 1801 to 1812. Chapter 22. The United States in 1800. 228. Area and population, 1800. The area of the United States in 1800 was the same as at the close of the Revolutionary War, but the population had begun to increase rapidly. In 1791, there were nearly 4 million people in the United States. By 1800, this number had risen to 5¼ million. Two-thirds of the people still lived on or near tidewater, but already nearly 400,000 people lived west of the Alleghanies. In 1791, the center of population had been east of Baltimore. It was now 18 miles west of that city. 229. Cities and towns in 1800. Philadelphia was the largest city in the United States. It had a population of 70,000. But New York was not far behind Philadelphia in population. Except these two, no city in the whole United States had more than 30,000 inhabitants. The seat of government had been removed from Philadelphia to Washington, but the new capital was a city only in name. One broad, long street, Pennsylvania Avenue, led from the unfinished Capitol to the unfinished White House. Congress held its sessions in a temporary wooden building. The White House could be lived in, but Mrs. Adams found the unfinished reception room very convenient for drying clothes on rainy Mondays. A few cheaply built and very uncomfortable boarding houses completed the city. 230. Traveling in 1800. The traveler in those days had a very hard time. On the best roads of the North, in the best coach, and with the best weather one might cover as many as 40 miles a day, but the traveler had to start very early in the morning to do this. Generally, he thought himself fortunate if he made 25 miles in the 24 hours. South of the Potomac, there were no public coaches, and the traveler generally rode on horseback. A few rich men, like Washington, rode in their own coaches. Everywhere, north and south, the inns were uncomfortable and the food was poor. Whenever it was possible, the traveler went by water, but that was dangerous work. Lighthouses were far apart, and there were no public buoys to guide the mariner, and almost nothing had been done to improve navigation. 231. The steamboat. The steamboat came to change all this. While Washington was still president, a queer-looking boat sailed up and down the Delaware. She was propelled by oars or paddles, which were worked by steam. This boat must have been very uncomfortable, and few persons wished to go on her. Robert Fulton made the first successful steamboat. She was named the Clermont, and was launched in 1807. She had paddle wheels and steamed against the wind and tide of the Hudson River. At first some people thought she was bewitched, but when it was found that she ran safely and regularly, people began to travel on her. Before a great while steamboats appeared in all parts of the country. 232. Making of the West. Even before the Revolutionary War, explorers and settlers had crossed the Alleghany Mountains. In Washington's time, pioneers, leaving Pittsburgh, floated down the Ohio River in flatboats. Some of these settled in Cincinnati. Others went farther down the river to Louisville, in Kentucky, and still others founded Wheeling and Marietta. In 1811, the first steamboat appeared on the western rivers. The whole problem of living in the West rapidly changed, for the steamboat could go upstream as well as downstream. Communication between the new settlements and New Orleans and Pittsburgh was now much safer and very much easier. 233. Cotton growing in the South. Cotton had been grown in the South for many years. It had been made on the plantations into a rough cloth. Very little had been sent away. The reason for this was that it took a very long time to separate the cotton fiber from the seed. One slave working for a whole day could hardly clean more than a pound of cotton. Still, as time went on, more cotton was grown. In 1784, a few bags of cotton were sent to England. The Englishmen promptly seized it because they did not believe that so much cotton could be grown in America. In 1791, nearly 200,000 pounds of cotton were exported from the South. Then came Whitney's great invention, which entirely changed the whole history of the country. 234. Whitney's cotton gin, 1793. Eli Whitney was a Connecticut schoolmaster. He went to Georgia to teach General Greene's children. He was very ingenious, and one day Mrs. Greene suggested to him that he might make a machine which would separate the cotton fiber from the cotton seed. Whitney set to work and soon made an engine, or gin as he called it, that would do this. The first machine was a rude affair, but even with it, one slave could clean 100 pounds of cotton in a day. Mrs. Greene's neighbors promptly broke into Whitney's shop and stole his machine. Whitney's cotton gin made the growing of cotton profitable, and so fastened slavery on the South. With the exception of the steam locomotive and the reaper, no invention has so tremendously influenced the history of the United States. 235. Colonial manufactures. Before the Revolutionary War, there were very few mills or factories in the colonies. There was no money to put into such undertakings, and no operatives to work the mills if they had been built. The only colonial manufactures that amounted to much were the making of nails and shoes. These articles could be made at home, on the farms, in the winter, when no work could be done out of doors. 236. Growth of manufactures, 1789 to 1800. As soon as the new government with its wide powers was established, manufacturing started into life. Old mills were set to work. While the Revolution had been going on in America, great improvements in the spinning of yarn and the weaving of cloth had been made in England. Parliament made laws to prevent the export from England of machinery or patterns of machinery, but it could not prevent Englishmen from coming to America. Among the recent immigrants to the United States was Samuel Slater. He brought no patterns with him, but he was familiar with the new methods of spinning. He soon built spinning machinery. New cotton mills were now set up in several places, but it was some time before the new weaving machinery was introduced into America. End of chapter 22. Chapter 23. Jefferson's Administrations. 237. President Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson was a Republican. He believed in the Republican form of government. He believed the wisdom of the people to be the best guide. He wished the president to be simple and cordial in his relations with his fellow citizens. Adams had ridden to his inauguration in a coach drawn by 6 cream-colored horses. Jefferson walked with a few hundred friends from his boarding house to the Capitol. Washington and Adams had gone into state to Congress, and had opened the session with a speech. Jefferson sent a written message to Congress by a messenger. Instead of bowing stiffly to those who came to see him, he shook hands with them and tried to make them feel at ease in his presence. 238. The Civil Service. One of the first matters to take Jefferson's attention was the condition of the civil service. There was not a Republican office holder in the government service. Washington, in the last years of his presidency, and Adams also had given office only to the Federalists. Jefferson thought it was absolutely necessary to have some officials upon whom he could rely, so he removed a few Federalist office holders and appointed Republicans to their places. Adams had even gone so far as to appoint officers up to the midnight of his last day in office. Indeed, John Marshall, his Secretary of State, was busy signing commissions when Jefferson's Attorney General walked in with his watch in hand and told Marshall that it was 12 o'clock. Jefferson and Madison, the new Secretary of State, refused to deliver these commissions even when Marshall, as Chief Justice, ordered Madison to deliver them. 239. The Judiciary Act of 1801. One of the last laws made by the Federalists was the Judiciary Act of 1801. This law greatly enlarged the national judiciary, and Adams eagerly seized the opportunity to appoint his friends to the new offices. The Republican Congress now repealed this Judiciary Act and legislated out of office all the new judges. For it must be remembered that the Constitution makes only the members of the Supreme Court sure of their offices. Congress also got rid of many other Federalist office holders by repealing the Internal Revenue Act. But while all this was done, Jefferson steadily refused to appoint men to office merely because they were Republicans. One man claimed an office on the ground that he was a Republican, and that the Republicans were the saviors of the Republic. Jefferson replied that Rome had been saved by geese, but he had never heard that geese were given offices. 240. Paying the national debt. Jefferson was especially anxious to cut down the expenses of the government and to pay as much as possible of the national debt. Madison and Gallatin worked heartily with him to carry out this policy. The repeal of the Internal Revenue Act took much revenue from the government, but it also did away with the salaries of a great many officials. The repeal of the Judiciary Act also put an end to many salaries. Now that the dispute with France was ended, Jefferson thought that the army and the navy might safely be reduced. Most of the naval vessels were sold. A few good ships were kept at sea, and the rest were tied up at the wharves. The number of ministers to European states was reduced to the lowest possible limit, and the civil service at home was also cut down. The expenses of the government were in these ways greatly lessened. At the same time, the revenue from the customs service increased. The result was that in the 8 years of Jefferson's administrations, the national debt shrank from $83 million to $45 million. Yet, in the same time, the United States paid $15 million for Louisiana and waged a series of successful and costly wars with the pirates of the northern coast of Africa. 241. Louisiana again a French colony. Spanish territory now bounded the United States on the south and the west. The Spaniards were not good neighbors, because it was very hard to make them come to an agreement, and next to impossible to make them keep an agreement when it was made. But this did not matter very much, because Spain was a weak power and was growing weaker every year. Sooner or later, the United States would gain its point. Suddenly, however, it was announced that France had got back Louisiana. And, almost at the same moment, the Spanish governor of Louisiana said that Americans could no longer deposit their goods at New Orleans. At once there was a great outcry in the West. Jefferson determined to buy from France New Orleans and the land eastward from the mouth of the Mississippi. 242. The Louisiana Purchase, 1803. When Napoleon got Louisiana from Spain, he had an idea of again founding a great French colony in America. At the moment, France and Great Britain were at peace. But it soon looked as if war would begin again. Napoleon knew that the British would at once seize Louisiana, and he could not keep it anyway. So one day, when the Americans and the French were talking about the purchase of New Orleans, the French minister suddenly asked if the United States would not like to buy the whole of Louisiana. Monroe and Livingston, the American ministers, had no authority to buy Louisiana, but the purchase of the whole colony would be a great benefit to the United States, so they quickly agreed to pay $15 million for the whole of Louisiana. 243. The treaty ratified. Jefferson found himself in a strange position. The Constitution nowhere delegated the United States power to acquire territory. But after thinking it over, Jefferson felt sure that the people would approve of the purchase. The treaty was ratified, the money was paid. This purchase turned out to be a most fortunate thing. It gave to the United States the whole western valley of Mississippi. It also gave to the Americans the opportunity to explore and settle Oregon, which lay beyond the limits of Louisiana. 244. Lewis and Clark's expeditions. Jefferson soon sent out several expeditions to explore the unknown portions of the continent. The most important of these was the expedition led by two army officers, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, brother of General George Rogers Clark. Leaving St. Louis, they slowly ascended the muddy Missouri. They passed the site of the present city of Omaha. They passed the Council Bluffs. The current of the river now became so rapid that the explorers left their boats and traveled along the river's bank. They gained the sources of the Missouri and came to a westward flowing river. On and on they followed it until they came to the river's mouth. A fog hung low over the water. Suddenly it lifted. There before the explorers' eyes the river, in waves like small mountains, rolled out into the ocean. They had traced the Columbia River from its upper course to the Pacific. Captain Gray in the Boston ship Columbia had already entered the mouth of the river, but Lewis and Clark were the first white men to reach it overland. 245. The 12th Amendment, 1804. 4 presidential elections had now been held under the method provided by the Constitution, and that method had not worked well. It was now, 1804, changed by the adoption of the 12th Amendment, which is still in force. The old machinery of presidential electors was kept, but it was provided that in the future each elector should vote for president and vice president on separate and distinct ballots. The voters had no more part in the election under the new system than they had had under the old system. The old method of apportioning electors among the states was also kept. This gives to each state as many electors as it has senators and representatives in Congress. No matter how small its territory or how small its population, a state has at least 2 senators and 1 representative, and, therefore, 3 electors. The result is that each voter in a small state has more influence in choosing the president than each voter in a large state. Indeed, several presidents have been elected by minorities of the voters of the country as a whole. 246. Re-election of Jefferson, 1804. Jefferson's first administration had been most successful. The Republicans had repealed many unpopular laws. By the purchase of Louisiana, the area of the United States had been doubled, and an end put to the dispute as to the navigation of the Mississippi. The expenses of the national government had been cut down, and a portion of the national debt had been paid. The people were prosperous and happy. Under these circumstances, Jefferson was triumphantly re-elected. He received 162 electoral votes to only 14 for his Federalist rival. End of chapter 23.